Welcome to Comix Relics. I'm Ray Mescalado, and today we're talking about God and toilets. Though best known for The Boys and Preacher, my favorite Garth Ennis comic is actually one of his earliest, a story serialized in Crisis UK in 1989 and 1990. It was called True Faith, like the New Order song, and Ennis was paired with Warren Pleece as his artist. It has all the violence and blasphemy and gutter humor you'd expect from an Ennis comic, but with some teen angst and romance thrown into the mix as well. You can see Ennis developing his voice in this comic, with its irreverence and hapless charm and an appreciation for bloody consequences. True Faith is about Nigel, a teenage loser type who is smitten with Angela, a classmate who is part of the school's Bible study fellowship group. For Angela's sake, he pretends to be interested in Christianity, but an unfortunate incident has him cross paths with Terry. Terry is a plumbing supply salesman who suffered a huge tragedy in his life and has decided God is a blockage in the toilet pipe of the world. You can guess what that blockage means. To free that blockage in the plumbing, Terry has decided to kill God and actively recruits Nigel to help him. And as it turns out, this odd couple are not the only one with such plans in mind. This may sound like a dour and violent and blasphemous comic, but it's not. It's more of an upbeat and violent and blasphemous comic, a fun madcap romp about domestic religious terrorism. This should not be a surprise for fans of Ennis, given his treatment of God and Preacher, and the involvement of shadowy government forces calls to mind many of his best-known series like The Boys and Punisher. However, I should note that the violence in this book may be objectionable for its victims and locations, but it does not have the loopy excesses and inventive twists that would appear in his later work. In that way, True Faith is relatively grounded and more realistic. There's still a lot of blood and guts, and one moment of animal cruelty that will probably upset many, but we're not talking boys level Grand Guignol bizarreness. I love True Faith. That and Troubled Souls were my first exposure to Ennis, as they were both reprinted in trade collections by Fleetway, and those trades made their way to America. Troubled Souls was a serious and heartfelt work about political and personal strife in Northern Ireland, but it was a bit too serious for me, I guess. Ennis would then take characters from that story and go for gross-out humor and sex jokes in sequels like For a Few Troubles More and Dicks. Unfortunately, those follow-ups weren't very good either, just puerile and silly. True Faith looked like a class act in comparison, and actually had some interesting things to say about the power of belief and how it can be manipulated. I wouldn't call this a deep or philosophical exploration, but it does use the subject matter intelligently and respectfully, even while Ennis tries hard to go for big laughs and morbidly entertaining setups. Terry does give a speech at one point about guns and Dirty Harry, which is particularly effective. We would see such pop culture musings later in Preacher and Hitman, but it's especially memorable here. Nigel is a great character, the only one that you can get behind in True Faith. All the people at school are annoying, even Angela, while the God killers in the book are caricatures at best. It is easy to feel sorry for Terry's loss and his path of vengeance, but even that motivation is compromised by the end. Nigel is a classic sad sack Gen X youth. You could see a bit of Buddy Bradley in him, actually. Nigel first feels trapped by his attraction to Angela, then caught in Terry's delusions as his unwilling accomplice, but it only gets worse from there as he realizes that conviction in one's beliefs, true faith, is even rarer than he thought. The climax of the story feels kind of forced and haphazard, sinister and cynical, but not exactly satisfying. However, the ending is much better, closing with an upbeat, poetically just, and morally reprehensible epiphany that always leaves me with a smile on my face. The art by Warren Pleece is absolutely fantastic. I had seen issues of Velocity by that time, the comic that Warren and his brother Gary put out, and I think it's one of the greatest comics from the indie UK comic scene, perhaps second only to Eddie Campbell's Alec. Pleece has a style that reminds me of Alex Toth and Jose Munoz, deeply moody with its mastery of chiaroscuro, but also able to pull off snarky juvenile humor without skipping a beat. It's almost like you're reading a lax sinner at one moment, and then it becomes something from Leo Baxendale. Such tonal shifts are key to enjoying True Faith, as we can be horrified one moment and then laughing at poor Nigel the next. If I had any misgivings about the art, it's that I prefer Warren Pleece's work in black and white. The coloring for True Faith is often somber and dark, but it does suit the mood of the overall story, and it does contrast nicely to the deceptively light mood of the ending. I can't recommend True Faith enough. It's one of my favorite comics from that era, and it still delights me to this day. It's worth it for the first great comic by a still evolving Ennis, as well as top-notch visual work by Pleece. It's not for the faint of heart or the easily offended, but that was the case with these creators anyway. Vertigo reprinted the comic in a very affordable trade paperback back at the end of the 1990s, and it's pretty easy to find on eBay and elsewhere. It's definitely worth seeking out if you want to indulge your inner bastard for a bit of heresy and ultraviolence. And with that said, I'm Ray Mescalado. Thank you for indulging me again. This is Comic Relics. Have a good day. Goodbye.